Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. I'm your co-host, Rabbi Jaffe, alongside Rabbi Londy. Today, we are going to talk about reactions and feelings about Mamdani's election and what that means for the Jewish community, both in New York City and larger New York, and even throughout the country, and ways that we are dealing with that and how it's landing on us as rabbis in our own conversations. So we talked a little bit about this. We said that maybe I'll just start off and offer some framing for this, and we'll go from there. I think for me, one of the takeaways from this election is that I think that we can often project our own values and priorities as though those should be the priorities and values of Judaism writ large. And I think that there are a lot of Jews out there, and we speak about this in our podcast, especially younger Jews, for whom Israel and to some degree anti-Semitism play a less significant, less central role in their Jewish identity. And I think that what we saw in, maybe it looks like 1 out of every 3 Jews in New York City voted for Mamdani. If you take out the Haredi sect or Orthodox, you're probably looking at the majority of non-Orthodox Jews in Israel, especially the majority of younger
in New York.
non-Orthodox Jews, in New York, thank you, voting. I think that one thing that they are saying is that their number one priority is not necessarily Israel when they vote, and that they sized up Mamdani and they very much resonated with his economic messaging and ideas of affordability and equal access and pluralism and diversity. And for them, that was a much higher priority than talking about Israel, or perhaps were even willing to take the baggage that comes with him in his anti-Israel rhetoric and what that means for Jews writ large. And I think that we can sense in this moment a dissonance. It's not that one side is wrong and one side is right, but understanding where the community is coming from. I think that's something that we as rabbis have to understand and wrestle with.
This is such a contentious moment because I think that for a long time, Jews really did everything in order to perpetuate the idea of Klal Yisrael, of us being a people, and we know what happens when we're not united. We know what happens when we're fractured, when we fall apart. And I think for a long time we wanted to kind of pretend that like we're living in we were living in a golden age where I think in some ways we were really just united as a Jewish people, which is never fully the case. But right now what we're seeing, I actually think is so interesting. It's the embodiment of the Jewish values that we have instilled in this generation. We have, you spoke a lot about this on the High Holidays. We have really instilled in our children to have a love of others, tikkun olam, to see themselves as the ones who make change in the world. I'm so proud of our young people who go in the world and, vote and enact their democratic rights. But it is interesting that the rights that the rights and the ideals and the issues that are so core to who they are what they perceive to be their core Jewish values. But their core Jewish value is not about the safety of the Jewish people. It's about what does it mean to be Jewish in this world. You take care of the other. You take care of those who are in need of economic security. You take care of those who are in need of food security. And so I think that so many of the young people in the Jews in New York have voted for Mamdani exactly for what you said, because they really care about their Jewish values. But I think that perhaps we've done something in not showing them that first and foremost, you have to really care about, are the Jews in the world, are we safe and are we cared for? And is this something that's going to lead to further fracture, or this is going to eventually lead to cohesion? And I'm not sure, you and I have a difference of opinion here. I'm not sure what Mamdani's election as mayor does for Jews. I think that on paper, it's very, not just on paper, in my gut, it's very alarming,
Mhm.
the way that he speaks about Israel. On the other hand, there's what we say and what we do to get elected, and then there's how he's going to actually have to govern as the mayor, and he is going to have to deal with the greater Jewish community because they're definitely dominant and prominent in New York City.
I don't hold against younger American Jews their different prioritization when it comes to Israel, and especially for young American Jews who, I'll speak for myself, unlike me, don't see Israel from a lens of vulnerability, but rather see Israel as the bully of the neighborhood. And they also, when they look at Israel, they see Netanyahu, who many of them don't like. They see Smotrich, Ben Gvir. We were talking at the time of this taping just yesterday. A mosque in the West Bank was torched by settlers. There were dozens of settlers that created havoc in a way that this government does not crack down on in a way that we would expect. I understand their feelings to say that I think that Israel is strong as it is, and they don't need my help, so I can focus on other things. The area where I'm less understanding has to do with that sense of Klal Yisrael and safety of Jews. Let me speak about that. Mamdani made his political bones by making Jewish students on campus feel unsafe, by making them persona non grata, beginning with his own school at Bowdoin, but especially for those Jews who feel any sense of relationship to Israel, making them feel as they are unwelcome and that they are against the basic values for which he stands. I think that it's a very privileged position for someone living in New York City who is not an outwardly presenting Jew to say, well, I feel safe because no one will know when I can hide my Judaism. And I'll just avoid Grand Central when there's a huge protest going on there and people are calling to globalize the Intifada.
Yeah.
But I think that they are not taking into consideration the way that I would hope they would, the basic safety of Jews, especially those who do not have the privilege of hiding their Jewishness um, on the outside. And what I worry about is when you elect someone who is a DSA member, who on October the 8th, the day after October the 7th, DSA was in Times Square cheering on October the 7th, calling for the destruction of Israel, um, using anti-Semitic slurs carelessly. I think that you just have to listen to what they say to know what they mean, and to be willing to swallow that and to say that, oh well, it doesn't really make me feel unsafe, and so it's not a priority to me. That frankly, that disappoints me. Um, and I worry about what that means for a sense of Klal Yisrael. What do the other Jews think of when they encounter a Jew who voted in a way that makes them feel less safe?
Yeah. The fact that we're even having this conversation in the 21st century, today we're in the year 2025, about are New York Jews safe, is actually really quite chilling. It's chilling and it's disturbing. And I'm often a person that it takes me a little bit of distance from a situation to feel it and to get emotional and to understand the ramifications and implications of something. And so I've been hopeful that Mamdani coming into the role that he's come into will understand that he needs to be a little bit less radical in his speech and take back and apologize and learn and heal. But I think that you're right. We don't have the privilege of ignoring what people say and hearing them and knowing that if somebody says something, they mean it. And if somebody has said something for years and years and years, becoming mayor is not going to change them thinking that or working to make sure that those values are present and instilled in their work. Um, I, I'm wondering, do you actually go into New York City now feeling less safe as a Jew in the aftermath of this election?
I actually was having the same question to myself, and I was in New York City yesterday evening, and I went back this morning. Went down to HUC for our intern's sermon, and I walked the streets and I looked to see the stickers and the graffiti, and I was surprised to see the lack of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, or any of that political
Yeah.
graffiti around Israel, and so that made me feel a little bit better. Then again, after Mamdani won, and they had you saw the rallies out in the streets.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that there's when I go surfing in Queens, I drive down past JFK, and if you know on the way to JFK on the 678 there's a large mosque.
Yeah.
And that mosque has, over the past 2 years, at different times, put up a big flag of blood-stained hands on the outside of the mosque. That flag was being carried through the streets. I knew the flag when I saw it.
It's that light blue mosque.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
huge one that's on the
yeah.
side of the 678, right across the Jamaica Health Hospital. It's hard for me when if there is something that makes people who support Hamas and Hezbollah happy, that worries me. And you saw people out with Hamas and Hezbollah slogans and paraphernalia, and that really scares me. But I want to, if I can change it, I want to ask something to you. I want to bring up this election did not happen in a vacuum, and he had adversaries, he had competitors for this, and the main one was Cuomo. And we can talk about the fact that this was really that there was such bad choices all around when it comes to this. And I think to myself that, and coming again from a male perspective, who am I to say that you should prioritize your Judaism because because Mamdani makes Jews feel unsafe? Whereas for Cuomo as a woman, you could say that Cuomo makes women feel unsafe. And is that a value judgment to say that, well, which one should take priority? And is that a blind spot for people like me talking about this election and not giving full lip service to the baggage of his competitors?
That's an excellent question. It's amazing how we prioritize our morals and our values when we have something that really sits at the core of who we are in our self-interest. So when I'm thinking about myself as Leora, and again, I didn't vote in this election because I don't live in New York City, but we are very close. I think that before everything, I think about myself as a Jew these days. I guess in some bizarre way, I've gotten used to chauvinism and sexism, and I already have in Hebrew you say I have my malpakim, I have my elbows ready for that, and I know how to go about as a woman in the world and protect myself. And I know what I let come into my heart, and I know what to move on from and how to speak my mind based on that. I've always protected my Jewish identity and loved being Jewish, and that's such a core element of my existence. I've never really felt a need to vote as a Jew until the last few years. And so, in some ways, it's easier for me to make sense out of voting for someone who is a sexual predator.
Well, do you think about voting as a woman?
You know what? I think about voting as a mother, and I think about who's going to protect my daughter's rights as a woman. That is always first and foremost on my mind. And I don't know. I don't think that Andrew Cuomo, when I was doing the math of what kind of candidate he was in my head, of course, he's really a troublesome and troubled candidate and figure and human being. And that he also, really talks about that and puts that on full display. But I think that really what got at my kishka in this one was the fact that there is a candidate who speaks about how my people and my tradition and the place where I come from and the place where my kids are from, how that's not a legitimate place on this planet. As if I need to apologize for my existence, to completely ignore what it means to be Israeli, to completely ignore like the internal conversation. So there were so many conversations that were going on. There was the internal conversation amongst us Jews. There was the external conversation with the rest of the world. There was another external conversation between Jews who were like, yeah, but we have to vote as Jews, and Jews who were like, no, but we have to vote as liberal members of society. And so there were so many conversations going all at once, and we're kind of just left so what do we do now? because this is the reality.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a question that New York Jewish leaders are asking themselves, and we're asking ourselves, what do you do when you do have a candidate? And we've talked about this before in different ways. What do you do when you do have a candidate that you have to work with, because you have no other choice?
Yeah, I wanted to hear your responses when it came to the gender issue, because I think with me, I have a pretty set view, and but I'm coming at this obviously from I want to be um open and humble when it comes to hearing from you as a woman. I feel as though it'd be one thing. Yes, Cuomo has a terrible history when it comes to women and to inappropriate touching and comments and all of that. But the policies that Cuomo supports are largely policies that, to me, feel like they are supportive of women's rights to choose, of women's reproductive rights, of women's healthcare rights.
Yeah, you can separate the character from the legislator. Yeah.
Look, Biden was handsy and a hair sniffer. Clinton, we don't even need to go into, but both of them supported policies that we would feel would be beneficial to our daughters. And so I think people took that baggage and were able to vote. That's very different than someone who sets policy. And that's when I want to go back to Mamdani. Mamdani, when he talks about cutting ties between New York City and the Technion, there's a studying financial relationship between the two. Like, that's a policy decision. When he talks about arresting Netanyahu, a head of state of a democratically elected, country, that is a policy decision.
Right. And also Israelis want to do that themselves. You can't take that away from them.
Exactly.
I'm half kidding.
But I want to go even further than that to where you last left off. I think that the most dangerous thing is Mamdani projects a worldview where if you look, all of the evils, all of the maladies that plague our world, there is an Israeli somewhere behind it. When he says that the NYPD laces up their boots with the IDF, he is saying that police violence in our country, he's tracing back to the IDF. That is to say that there are Jews responsible when it comes to police brutality. That is an incredible jump to make, to say that the boogeyman of the Jew is behind this problem. And that's not the only one. When it comes to issues around world wars, right? When it comes to issues of outside influence in America's government, right? When it comes to issues of, for sure, Middle East politics and peace, and the various wars that erupt, he sees Israel behind all of it. And it just goes to, it's the same theme, that the new form of Jew hatred, that whatever is most anathema to us, we assign to the Jew. So in the 21st century, racism, to apartheid, ethno state, settler colonialism, whatever you can say is the worst thing now, you assign to the Jewish state. And that for Mamdani, that those things that most ail society and our world, if you go back up to the source, ultimately you're going to find a Jew there. And I find that to be incredibly dangerous, just poisonous to our society. And I don't know what to do with that.
First of all, he has so many Jewish supporters. I mean, I think that you've really tapped into something right now where there's such a fine line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I don't think we would say it's such a fine line. We would say anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are the same. But there's so many Jews that were supportive of him, that are proud of their Judaism, that are explicitly anti-Zionism.
Are they anti-Zionism, or are they sort of non-Zionist? I think there's more of them out there for whom Israel just doesn't really occupy a large part of space in their mind.
I think it's maybe both.
Mhm.
I think it's both. I mean, I think Israel occupies such a prominent space in people's minds as of late. Maybe 2 years ago, that would have been the case. But Israel's always been front and center in so many ways.
I guess, do you think that the majority of the Jews who voted for Mamdani did so partly because of his stance on Israel and Jews, or despite that?
I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are, but I do know that so many Jews are deeply uncomfortable with what Israel looks like today. And that's the only Israel that they know. And so if the only Israel that you know it's not the aspirational one, it's not the fantastical one, it's not the one that Israel, like the one that we know that Israel is working so hard to be better, is the one that checks its own system. Israelis are working so hard to make sure that it's not what it's being presented as in the news. But if you only know what the news tells you,
And
then
what TikTok
yeah,
tells you.
what TikTok tells you, especially what social media tells you, then of course you have reason to be anti-Israel. Um,
But
that is
that
so offensive and terrible and misrepresentation of what Israel is. But Israel is not, the Israeli government is not doing a good job right now of making anybody who who has been on the fence about it believe in it.
I have a little bit more I guess forgiveness for the Israeli government, only because I see that so much of the media is very much in the business of spreading blood libels against the Jewish
Absolutely,
people.
you're
And
right.
the the story about the BBC over the past week, and the
Yeah.
degrees to which, when you have a story about Israel and Hamas and the narrator is the child of a Hamas minister, and that is not divulged to the audience as it's being given, when the Al-Aqi hospital is bombed by an errant rocket by the Palestinians themselves, and is immediately written as an Israeli bomb of of this blood libel
Yeah.
killing children. So I feel like what the sad thing, what I'm hearing you say, is that for a lot of young Jews out there, they do not have the knowledge nor the discernment to be able to object to these blood libels against Israel, and in fact, they are digesting and assimilating these blood libels against the Jewish people, but they don't have the basic sechel, they don't have the knowledge. This is, again, Sarah Horowitz writes about this in her book. When what are you going to say if you are a unknowledgeable Jew and someone says that Israel is killing babies and committing genocide? Are you going to say, "I'm sorry, but I love kugel," right? That like, if they don't have the basic knowledge to just to call out a lie, or to even to fathom the fact that maybe what they're receiving online, just because you repeat the same lie 100 times doesn't make it more true, but that seems to be a very effective medium at the moment.
I just like, no, I just have to breathe through that because it's so disturbing to me. Um,
Because you and I have both spent time in Israel, and so much time that if you spend time, and this is, I think, the problem of these Disneylandification trips to Israel, where it's all, everything's fantastic. But if you go to Israel for 1 week, and you will sit and you will stew in the complexity and the beauty and the the duality, the plurality of all that goes on there, everything that's being said by people like Mamdani dissipates in a moment, and it's like, again, I feel like, coming from a society, coming from a home community of non-Jews, I think about what they think often. It's like in the back of my head, and it's so hurtful to me that they have this boogeyman in their head of this militaristic,
Yeah.
racist state, this awful place. And when I go to Israel, I see old ladies doing Pilates on, like on the beach. It's like, and playing,
I know
like,
it's not the same. It's not the same
so
image.
different.
It's not the same experience. This week when I was reading both the American news and the Israeli news, I started getting pop-ups in my WhatsApp, and then um, Israelis love WhatsApp. And I saw that a friend of mine, a Reform rabbi, she had been hurt in a settler attack in Israel.
Yeah, I saw
Um,
that.
her hand had been cut by a drone that was being used by settlers. And what were those rabbis? They're from a group called Rabbis for Human Rights. What were they doing? They were helping Arabs in the settlements pick their olive groves and protect them against the Israeli settlers. And I was just like, if only somebody would cover that properly on the news, that Israelis are standing up for Palestinians, protecting Palestinians against other Israelis. That just tells so much more of the story. That just tells so much more of the nuance. And I'm so sickened by the fact that we've just made it all black and white. There's a good side and there's a bad side, and you better get on the right train, otherwise you're going to hell. And so I see these people who are voting with hope. I think that so many of the Jews who voted for Mamdani are voting with the value of in the value and the feeling of hope in their heart, because they want to elect someone whose parents are immigrants to America, who is an immigrant himself. They're playing into a narrative of like, this is the American dream. Look who can be elected mayor of New York. Look who's going to change everything. look who's going to make things better. Look who's going to make New York affordable again. And it's such a hopeful stance, but they're also rewriting history and writing out so much of the hurtful and hateful. And as we began with, his rhetoric makes Jews more unsafe. And I stand by that, even though I also have hope in my heart that he's going to be a mayor that unites New York. I always hope for the success of all of elected officials. I believe that I really truly hope that he takes this moment and kind of reconfigures his heart and figures out how to be a uniter. Um, but one of my problems with this moment is not just how Jews voted without Israel on their mind or despite Israel. One of the things that has been really disturbing for me is also how this has empowered the Jewish community to kind of open up a can of Islamophobia. And I've seen that more and more just because there's a mayor who is really problematic and perhaps dangerous for Israel. That doesn't give Jews the right or anybody else the right to spin that and make it less safe for Muslims in New York.
I agree and disagree.
Sure. That's what we're here for.
Islamophobia is always wrong, and we should always call it out. And when the Trump administration, the first term, called for a ban on several Muslim countries, that Jews and synagogues were in the forefront of calling that out. At the same time, the levels of which Islamophobia and Islamophobic attacks occur in the U.S. compared to attacks on Jews, to some, I take. I am offended when someone says every time they have to talk about anti-Semitism, they have to mention Islamophobia as well, because you're all sides mattering it. You're saying both sides matter. You can't just say Black Lives Matter. You're saying all lives matter, because if the numbers of Islamophobic attacks in Israel in the U.S. have gone up, maybe if you look at the statistics, around 10%, 5%, and for Jews 700%, and that we have professional security squads.
Right.
I'm just saying that I think we need to be able to call out Islamophobia and Islamophobic attacks, but I don't think that every time we talk about our own needs, we need to say, oh, but also it's all sides matter.
Okay, well, as I like to say, I like to hold, two things to be true at once.
Yes.
There is an uptake in anti-Semitism in the most terrible, catastrophic of ways, no doubt. However, when we are in a place of being victims, one of the things that has been done throughout history is the victim victimizes. And I do not ever want to create legitimacy for that in our community.
I agree.
And I don't think you did.
I think that what you're talking about are outlier cases, and here's my proof to that. Go to a Democratic Socialists of America protest. Go to one of the pro-Palestinian protests in the city, and you will hear terrible things being said about Jews and about Israel. You will hear globalize the Intifada. You will hear from the river to the sea a call for the complete erasure of all Jews from Israel. And then you will hear straight up anti-Semitic slurs. Now,
Sure.
go to a pro-Israel rally in the city. How many calls do you hear for violence against Palestinians, violence against Arabs, or violence against Muslims? None. Maybe one or two nuts people on the outside. It is not the source. They are the Yotze Min Haklal. They are the differentiator. And I think that it is a core part of the pro-Palestinian movement in America and in the world writ large to say terrible things about Jews. And I don't think that there's a both sides to that. I think that those are the exceptions to the rule within the Jewish community. I think the settler movement and the fact that the current Israeli government passes a blind eye to the violence against Arabs and Muslims in Israel is a black mark on the soul of not just Israel, but of the Jewish people.
I think more and more people, I think, it's just amazing that the trends that we're seeing in the world right now in general.
Mm-hmm.
People just want to scream into the abyss, and people want something to scream into the abyss about.
Yeah.
And it was Israel and it was Palestine, and now it's crossing into anti-Semitism. And all I'm saying is I don't ever want us to believe, and I've seen it more and more, I never want us to believe that just because everyone else is calling out into the abyss about how angry they are and how unjust the world is, that we have any right to ever victimize or vilify another group of
Absolutely.
people. We still have to protect ourselves and we still have to call out bad behavior when we see it, but we don't do that by saying you're the other and this is why you are venom or poison to our society.
That's why I can't stand this binary of pro-Israel versus pro-Palestinian. For those of us who believe that maybe one day there will be a situation in which Jews and Palestinians can live side by side in their own countries of complete and total peace and harmony, like that. I don't see myself as being anti-Palestinian. I don't want bad things to happen to Palestinians.
Yeah, of
I think
course.
we would say that like when there is a Palestinian civilian killed, it is a tragedy. Full stop. Like there is a life is a life. And that because I am supportive of Israel's right to defend itself, and I want Israelis to have security, and I want them to have freedom, and I want them to have all of the good things in life, doesn't mean I don't want the exact same things for the Palestinians. And I think that that's often the binary that we get. It's almost like a team that you have to root for, and like who's the princess and who's the dragon in this story. I think that's so hurtful. Can I pivot to another part of this conversation? Is that okay?
Sure.
So there's one half of me that looks at the election results and hears about the different proposals that Mamdani makes and has this in its mind. What a privileged group of young New Yorkers we're talking about here, who feel as though, again, the people who voted for Mamdani, as opposed to his post-election speech, are not the antis and the bodegas. The people of the poorest class did not elect Mamdani. The people who voted him overwhelmingly came from those of the upper middle class,
Exactly.
especially young people making six figures living in Williamsburg were the ones largely voting for Mamdani. And what you heard a lot of them in the exit polls is to say, I make $120,000 a year and my partner does as well, and we can't afford a place to live. And so we want to vote for these different policies. And in my mind, there's part of me that says, again, you privileged little snot, who says that you get to live in New York City and that that is something that's a birthright for you, and that there are many places that you could live. You could live in Houston, you could live in Indianapolis, you could live in Minneapolis, where there are good jobs, good schools, and that's how supply and demand works. And if I could have everything I wanted given to my life, and I could live anywhere and do anything, that's great. But that's not the way the world works. And it's almost like, again, the narrative goes that a generation that was raised on trophies for every time they blew their nose went to
How do you really feel?
went to schools where they paid $300,000, and at Harvard 60% of all grades are A's or A minuses, and came out and were expected to be gifted a job that was going to pay for them to live in the most expensive city in America, and that if they don't get those things given to them, then revolution should come. Especially, the Democratic Socialists, those who were old enough to actually live and to see the effects of communism and socialism are not voting for Mamdani. And so sometimes when a part of me, and I can go to another part in a second, but a part of me feels like, how privileged can these people be to feel as though they're not getting what they deserve by what they have? And I think there's an old saying that happiness equals expectation minus reality.
Where's that from?
It's great though. Happiness equals expectation minus reality. And if your expectation is that life on TikTok is what your life is going to look like, then you are always going to be unhappy and disappointed.
We're living in a time that doesn't have any precedence for it. We're raising kids who are being raised with social media, who are living very much in like a fantasy bubble, as you.
In which housing is unaffordable, and people, I think the average age now buying a home just hit 40 for the first time. It's the oldest.
Yeah,
and you, as someone who just purchased a home recently, have gone through all of the rigmarole and see exactly how unaffordable and how awful that situation is.
Completely crazy. And America had this ethos that we were in this narrative, we were raised with the American dream and that anyone can make it in America. And it's so hard when the things that we believe to be true about ourselves have to be rewritten and rewired. I mean, it's really tragic. And I think that I think that, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, that people voted with their sense of entitlement and with their sense of aspiration and with their sense of, this is what the narrative of my life looks like. There's no other possibility for what my life could look like. And to have any to have that equation off by a little is tragedy. And I actually never really thought of it that way. I think that's so interesting. Like, I think that we are going to see a shift into people having to leave New York City and people having to kind of reconfigure their lives.
Oh my God, I live in Hoboken. Like, is that such a tragedy?
Yeah, well, you're kind of saying it in a dismissive way. I think that when, dreams are shattered and we have to either move back home, or we have to ask our parents for help, or we have to take a different job, or we lose our job, or you just have to rewrite the story of who you are, we can't dismiss that. I think that people often vote with their emotion and often vote with a sense of what they believe their life should look like and what the discrepancies in that are. And so I think that that's just a really astute way of understanding people's voting patterns. I think that they're going to be disappointed when it doesn't automatically become more affordable, and when um, democratic socialism doesn't create magic. But I think that maybe I'm going to get into the spiritual, emotional right now. That's like a call for empathy. That, yeah, we have a lot of people who are being set up for disappointment and for failure, and how do we support them in that? I mean, Mamdani gave people a lot of hope.
I totally agree, and I want to speak to that. Living in Westchester, we don't get a lot of the commercials that are coming on the TV about the election. And at the end of October, I went on a vacation. I went to JFK Airport, and their ads were running nonstop. The Momdani ads were fantastic. The logo is genius. His wife did a great job with that.
Yeah.
He is charming. He's out there talking. He actually is the only candidate that actually has a message. He's talking about New York's not for sale. That's a salient message. He's talking about affordability. I have no idea what Andrew Cuomo's campaign was about. Like, other than the fact that, like,
code switch into different cultures. It's really
amazing. Absolutely. It was a fantastic, brilliant campaign. And I want to now speak a little bit with a little bit more empathy for young people. I understand it can be really tough right now. You're coming out into the world. You feel as though the baby boomers and the Gen Xers kind of got all of the goods, and they're hanging on to them. You can't buy a house until you're 40 years old. It's hard to have kids and to start a career. You're worried around the corner that AI is going to take your job at any time. Amazon just laid off 15,000 today. Verizon just announced 15,000 laid off. You're worried that that is the American dream over, and in the meantime, is the world basically baking ourselves to death in global warming that no one's taken care of, and that no one's listening and no one's doing about any of these things. And so I would understand if some young people feel as though finally someone is speaking to the frustrations that I feel and the reality that I inhabit, and I want someone to do something about that, and someone who provides me hope, or at least empathizes and understands where I'm coming from in a way that the Cuomo campaign was completely clueless about.
And Sila, I'm guessing
Do we even count?
So I'm gonna pivot back. Where, as what are Jewish leaders who came out publicly against him? What are they to do now in a reality where he's going to be the mayor?
Right. And we were talking that there's sort of multiple like lanes you could be in here. There's the lane on the far right to say, Haman is now in charge of Shushan, and our job is to stop Haman at any time. And the ADL came out that we're basically watching you, everything that you're doing, Momdani, and we're gonna be very like on you at all times. There is, the other camp of saying that, okay, Mamdani, we very much stood against a lot of the rhetoric that you use, but you are the mayor of New York City, and now we have to find areas of commonality and ways to work together.
Yeah.
And that's where I know the leaders of the reform movement have come very much out as well. And then we have to reckon with the members of our community who are not just going to be okay going along, but are thrilled, are electrified at this election. And I think that we've spent a lot of time talking. I think we have to do a lot of listening and just to understand where our young voters are coming from, what animates them, and try to understand what their sense of Klal Yisrael, of any sense of connection, obligation to the larger Jewish community, of what that means, and in what ways we need to do a better job of bringing their values and their needs into the broader Jewish community and make sure that they feel like they're being heard as well.
And I think something else, like we need to raise our young people with a sense of if they see a problem in the world, they can be the ones to change it.
Mhm.
We don't have to just wait for somebody to be elected who represents some of our values. If we see something that needs addressing, we address it. And I think that we have, one of the privileges that we have is getting to meet so many young people and help raise them in some ways, and identifying potential leaders, I think, is something, and helping them cultivate their leadership abilities, I think, is a responsibility that we have, and helping push for the changes in the future that we want to see.
Yeah, I take a lot of blame as well. Sorry, you hear me going my negative rant on us as parents. If you never talk to your kids about Jewish community or obligation to the Jewish community, or prioritizing the sense of Klal Yisrael at home, if you don't talk about Jewish subjects, if you don't talk about Israel at home, if you let TikTok educate your kids about Israel, um, what are you going to expect? One of my areas, I talked at the holidays about giving to Jewish sources and prioritizing Jewish needs. One thing I didn't bring up, but I'll do here, is it drives me bonkers when people talk about their kids and study abroad. Our kids go to study abroad in every country in Europe and Australia and Asia, etc. And they go to countries like Ireland, which are just rife with anti-Semitism, just the worst when it comes to this. And none of them even consider sending their kids to study abroad in Israel. And for me, my study abroad experience in Israel was so foundational for me and my Jewish identity. And the fact that my daughter is there right now studying for the semester, and the experiences she is having, which are going to change her life forever, how is that not even an option for our families? Where are their values when it comes to looking at study abroad and saying maybe you shouldn't go to Melbourne, maybe Tel Aviv is a good place to go instead? And I've talked to families about this, and they feel it's like scary to send their kids to Israel. I say, where's your Jewish kid going to be more safe? In Tel Aviv?
Yeah, drinking
Right?
stories.
Or in Dublin, right? Especially if that kid wears a Jewish star and a kippah out. Forget it. And I don't understand why we give such low prioritization to experiences around Jewish community, Jewish organizations, and specifically around Israel.
When I was a kid, I used to be so, like, I was raised as a staunch Zionist, I guess, duh, obviously. But I was always upset with my parents that like any vacation we took was to Israel. I was like, there's more to the world.
Mhm.
And they were like, no, we're going to Israel.
Mhm.
And I mean, a little part of me is still slightly resentful for not going to other places, but I really appreciate that value. It was, we have to really, we can't assume that Israel is going to exist in the way that we want it to exist if we are not a part of its future, if we're not a part of investing in it and investing that ideal that to be Jewish is to have a relationship with Israel and our children. We have to instill that very, very young, and be unapologetic and also open to what that relationship looks like. It's not a one size fits all.
My real fear with this, and here Dara Horn speaks to this very well. She writes about Hanukkah anti-Semitism versus Purim anti-Semitism, right? Purim anti-Semitism is, we hate you, we're going to kill you. Hanukkah anti-Semitism is, no, we are assimilating. We are the Hellenists, and we want you Jews be cool like us. If you just put down the parts of Judaism that make you unseemly to us, then you're going to be welcome in. And it's the Maccabees who say that, no, we're not going to become Hellenized. We are going to stand for what we believe in. And I worry that the message, and again, it's on college campuses and for young Jews, is to say, if you as a young Jew will just unburden yourself of the untidiness of connection to Israel, then you will be accepted and you'll be allowed in. And what history has showed us is that every time the Jews have been willing to do so, it has been ultimately to their doom. That is, that when we begin down the slippery slope of saying that we will comport ourselves and we will unburden ourselves of those parts of our Jewish identity which larger society finds unseemly, then we lose a core sense of who we are. And I feel like for a lot of young Jews today, the message is that if you want to be with the cool kids, and if you want to be, especially if you're on the liberal edge of the spectrum, then you have to distance yourself from Israel in order to play in the same sandbox. And I think a lot of young Jews are making that choice.
I'm finding myself just to be very emotional about that. Yeah, historically we've never done well by removing aspects of ourselves. Like as you said, the history of the Jewish people has been about assimilation. We don't need to be Jewish anymore. We can hold on to it a little bit, and then being bonked on the head, being reminded that we're Jewish and you can't forget that. And I living in that narrative as a constant, that we can't remember that we're Jewish unless someone tells us that we're Jewish and reminds us in a terrible way that we're Jewish, that makes me so deeply uncomfortable and sad that that's what it takes to remember. I think that we have to also take back our own Jewish narrative and say we don't always need to be reminded of it. We have to hold on to the pride and not always feel the existential threat in order to hold on to who we are. Like I think that that's kind of the tension of where we work and where we live and where we breathe and function, is how do we create beautiful Jewish joyful life, but also make people remember who they are, make people remember that they don't have to feel threatened in order to hold on to their Judaism. I know we have to finish in a moment, but after October 7th, we met as a community in the Beit Midrash downstairs, and someone ran to me and said, I can't believe I forgot that I'm Jewish before anything. And I was like, why did it take this moment for you to remember that? Didn't say that to them, but I've thought about that ever since. Why does it always take a tragedy, chaos, crisis for us to remember how wonderful it is to be a Jew? And so, with this new moment in New York City, I hope that people really hold on to their pride, not just out of fear, but out of just what it means to be a part of a people, how wonderful it is to be a Jew in the world. It's just every day I think about it. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to be a Jew.
I think that's a great last word. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.